Hello, this is Chris Cooper, and a big welcome to the Business Elevation Show on Voice America. It's great to see you meet you yet again, and be with another fantastic guest. This is episode 619, so we've done a few of these over the last 14 years. I don't think we've actually had a scientist like Dr. Ted Scambos on the show before, so I'm really excited about today. I always love to meet people who are out there doing fascinating work that is contributing to improving and developing the world. On last week's show, we had a lady, Ra Goddess, an unusual name, but she was amazing. She's got a book out called Intentional Ambition. She's doing incredible work. She takes people on trips around the globe, community trips to places in a place like the Middle East as well. And we talked about sort of people who are going through that transition, frustrated in work and maybe frustrated in the culture and the system that they're in, and actually thinking about recreating and transforming into your life into doing something perhaps different in a different way. So if you're going through transition with your work, then that's a really, really good interview. Little sort of update this week. I've always developed people, teams, and business cultures, but I've been hosting this show for 14 years now. We are one of the longest running business shows in the world, believe it or not. And what we also have is an incredible community called the Elevation Collective, where I've introduced amazing people I've interviewed over the year. So this week we had an event on Tuesday, and some of the people from the community joined. There was, I think, 33 of us, and we were an incredible smorgasbord of adventurers and record-holding athletes, TV people, entrepreneurs, people in corporate organizations, people with MBEs, OBEs, all sorts of things. And we were all working together and talking about how we do good in today's world. And I shared with them, I've created an ebook called The 10 Elevations for Thinking and Doing Good, for Thriving and Doing Good in Today's World. And that's been from the input from this show and from the Key Elevation Collective. So hopefully what we can do is launch that in December and share with you some key principles and lessons and learnings that people are adopting to ensure they keep motivated, keep inspired, and they keep on moving forward. So let's talk about today's guest and today's show. We're going to talk about something unusual. We're going to talk about a glacier. Well, it's not unusual because there are glaciers, but this is a glacier that could actually change everything. We're going to talk about the Thwaites Glacier in Antarctica, and also the experiences of my fascinating guest today, Dr. Ted Scambos, who's actually been on 24 Antarctic expeditions. This glacier is massive. It's the size of the United Kingdom, and it's sliding into the sea. It's known by some as the Doomsday Glacier, and it could raise global sea levels by more than 2 feet and trigger the collapse of the entire West Antarctic Ice Sheet and reshape coastlines and economies worldwide. Dr. Ted Scambos, he's a senior research scientist at the University of Colorado, and what he's going to do is going to share some of his experiences around his expeditions and what it's taught him about, climate tipping points. We're going to talk about resilience. We're going to talk about human ingenuity. We're going to talk about some of the things that he's learned while he's been on these expeditions with, a lot of other people and scientists who are all trying to understand and navigate, warming and this uncertain world. We talk today, many of us, about decarbonising and the promise of clean energy. We talk about AI and data-driven climate solutions. Some of our leaders seem to care more about this than others, but actually, this is really important. It's really important, and business actually, I think, has a role to step up, because where politics falters, perhaps it can help to fill some of those gaps and create hope and not just heat. So a big welcome today to my guest, to Dr. Ted Scambos.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah,
Really
lovely.
happy to be here.
Yeah, really good to have you on today. And thank you to Lalani Rashida Henry, who introduced us, who was on the show not too long ago, telling us about her father's expedition, being the first Black American to visit Antarctica. So thank you, Leilani. I really appreciate it. So tell us, Ted, how did you get into this field? How did you get interested in Antarctica? And I believe you were an astronomy club president when you were young. Is that correct? You were into
Yeah, I
astronomy as
was.
well. And so tell us a little bit about your background, when you were growing up and what inspired you to do what you do
Yeah,
today.
I've been interested in science for so long. I As a young child, it's not exactly science, but a fascination with the world and how things work. I can't even remember when it started. I know that my mother tells me, she used to point to the moon or to the stars in the sky when I was too young to remember, and would look at them for a long time. But as I grew older, into high school and stuff, I was fascinated with astronomy. Of course, it was during the space age, and I was really determined to study astronomy and the planets in detail and understand them better. So, to your question about how I got interested, I got into college and wanted to take astronomy and physics as a major. But I realized that that was going to be a very indoor kind of a job. And, I guess observatories at night, you see a little bit of the sky. But I took a geophysics course as part of my undergraduate education. I really liked the idea of mixing science and the outdoors. And from then on, I kind of resolved that, I didn't want to be a computer programmer or a data analyst for reams of astronomical data. I was much more interested in having an experience with the world that related to the science I was going to be working on. I got into remote sensing, and that sounds like maybe a contradiction, except the good thing about remote sensing is that you get to see a lot of the world in these satellite or airborne data sets. But you also have to go to these places. You go to
Mm,
selected places that really tell you a lot. You can see the overall picture, and you say, this area in particular is one that's going to really inform us about how this system is going to evolve or how this process works, that sort of thing. So I got involved in satellite imagery early on. At this point, I'd had various interests, chemistry and physics and astronomy, things like that. But I knew that my remote sensing had the best chance of getting a good job afterwards, after my PhD, and went and worked at NASA Goddard with a guy who was quite well known for mapping and understanding Antarctic glaciology. And I didn't know it. In fact, it actually worried me a bit because I'd changed the directions within science so often. I was really concerned that I was going to get into something, that I wasn't all that experienced in and have a lot to learn. But I stumbled into the perfect career for me because, all this time being interested in the planets and astronomy, the idea was that I could go there or experience it firsthand. And of course, that's an incredible one in a million shot for a
mm.
very few that manage to get out there. But for Antarctica, you get something that's very close to that kind of experience, a place that few people have been before, spectacular, interesting landscape with new processes that you're not familiar with. And it's a real environmental experience, surviving and building your your camp slash space station in the middle of the continent, and suiting up in order to really deal with not the coastal stuff. That's familiar to most people who've been in an extreme winter environment, but the interior of Antarctica takes it quite a step further. And even though the temperatures are ones where people say in North Dakota or possibly, I don't know, Sweden or Russia would say, oh, yeah, we have that in our town as well. Living in it and trying to do scientific work in it is quite a challenge. And it calls for some of the innovation and ingenuity and teamwork that I think we're going to talk about through the course of this show.
Yes, and when you're on the ice. How big is the community that you're living with? Are there tend to be a lot of people, or are you sometimes a
It,
small
it,
group that you take out?
it does vary quite a bit, but generally, for the work that I do, which is what we call the deep field in Antarctica, visiting small glaciers, areas of interesting snow features, or coastal areas like Thwaites Glacier. Typical group is something like 5 to 10 or 12 people, really quite small groups, and widely separated from other people on the continent. So that also it gets in you pretty quickly that when that plane leaves, having dropped off your camp in a bunch of big boxes that you have to then build and flies away, that's it. You're relying on your, let's say, seven teammates to get everything set up, going, get all the instruments working, and spread out across this landscape and collect measurements and data, solve problems, deal with weather issues, deal with shortages, deal with yeah, breakdowns, deal with each other too, which can be a big part of it. So yeah, it's an incredible experience. And I realized after the first field season that I really liked it and wanted to keep going, even though it wasn't always pleasant experiences. Um, Usually I was pretty happy with the outcome in the end.
And so tell us about, one or two of the experiences that you've had while you've been there that really stand out.
Oh my. Uh, well, in terms of dealing with the weather, uh, we crossed East Antarctica as a joint mission between Norway and the United States. And we were fairly late in the season. It was February, um, mid-February, and we got the first true Antarctic winter-like blast one day, still at about 9,000 feet, 3,000 meters, and closer to 10,000 feet.
Wow.
Um, on the East Antarctic Plateau and kind of realized that we were far enough north of the South Pole that the sun was beginning to set at night. So the temperatures would really plunge because you didn't have the sun to heat up the surface. The air is very dry, the sky is very clear. So you're really getting quite cold. It got to minus 47 Celsius, and we couldn't get the vehicle started. It took two vehicles' batteries in order to get one vehicle going, and then we used that one to start up everything else and drove immediately down to lower elevation, kind of drove for like 36 hours straight in order to get off of the plateau quickly because we'd stayed there about a week too long, apparently. Um, what's other experiences? I mean, I've been uh, by myself 50 miles away from anyone collecting GPS data. It was beautiful that day, but it was also a little concerning because I was so far away. And if I'd injured myself in a way that wouldn't let me get to my radio, then that would have been quite an interesting experience solution. There was a time quite a while ago before handheld GPS were really common. They were available, but we didn't have one for everybody. And we drove up this one large hillside, and sort of while we weren't looking behind us, this gray, thick fog bank came up behind us. And we had a string of poles separated by 500 meters each. And in order to get back, the light becomes very flat. You're in this, it's like you're swimming in a bowl of milk. You can't see anything. I mean, everything is afloat, and your friend, your partner driving along is just a body completely surrounded by white, evenly illuminated. We started to try to go back. These flags, these poles had flags on them 500 meters apart. And what I would do is wait at one flag because that was basically your trail home. And then my friend would drive out, she would drive out towards the other flag and wave as soon as she could see it. And at first that worked because she could see the flag before she herself disappeared in the fog. But then the fog got a little thicker as we went down the hill, and I had to leave the flag I was sitting by and walk in the direction so I could keep seeing her until I could still see the flag behind me. And
Right.
then she would wave and say, "Okay, I see the next flag." That took about 2 hours for us to get back to our camp, and it was it was just nerve-rattling because yeah, you really feel lost in space at that point. It was, and you get covered with frost too. In those conditions, the fog is like ice, so your clothing and your eyelashes and your hat all get covered in frost. It's like Antarctica is trying to swallow you up. So yeah, that was quite the experience.
And are you literally what are you sleeping in? Do you because 'cause sometimes you see people out on on ice in the fixed buildings, or
And
mobile buildings and things like that. Are you intense when you just
well, we're
what keeps you warm?
Yeah, we're in those smaller camps. We tend to be either in a mountaineering tent, very lightweight, those flexible poles and stuff, the modern ones nowadays. But there's a tent that is much more popular. It's quite a bit heavier, and it was designed by Robert Falcon Scott. It's called a Scott tent to this day, and to this day, it's the one that people prefer because it's virtually invulnerable to the weather. It's a double-walled tent, so there's two sheets of cloth. It doesn't, the floor is detached. You lay out a tarp basically over spread out to the corners of this pyramid-shaped tent with these thick poles. Now, those tents weigh about a little over 100 pounds. What would that be? Maybe just under 50 kilos each. So bringing several of those along is a significant weight for some of the aircraft that we use. So there's a debate about mountaineering tents. Usually you get one person in your own mountaineering tent. Usually for a Scott tent, they're big enough for two people. Um, and they're very durable. This Thwaites project, we had a decent storm come through the camp, and all of the mountain tents found that they had to get out and build rather quickly a snow wall to defend against the wind because the wind was piling snow on top of the tent and bending the poles and, not quite crushing the people inside, but it would have been difficult to keep it open and easily accessible if we had the storm last for a few days. The Scott tents didn't need any of that. They shed the snow really well and basically, uh, yeah, we're not bothered by this intense windstorm and blowing snow that we had for a couple of days.
So when you're sitting in a tent and it's minus 47 outside,
Oh,
do you ever wish you were back home in the United States with your family?
the temperatures don't have to get nearly that cold for me to wish that I was back home under those conditions. In fact, on that Norway experience, well, yeah, it was kind of cold for me. I was sleeping in one of the vehicles. We had a bunk room that technically could hold 50 people, three to a room, but it was much more comfortable. We had 12 people, and it was much more comfortable with two people per room, and then me and this one very outdoorsy woman. Very, it's impressive. She would set up a tent and sleep out, although not at minus 47. We both slept inside the vehicles for those couple of days when it really plunged, the temperature plunged. But yeah, I basically yeah, slept, I lived in a car in Antarctica for like a couple of weeks actually. So
Yeah, amazing. And what have you learned about leadership and planning and teamwork when you've been on these
it's a real
experiences?
challenge, and you don't really expect it as a challenge when you start because the office world is easy. It's easy to take a break from someone. You don't even perhaps perceive all of the things that might be points of friction or annoyance or whatever when you're in an office environment with people. But when you go into the field, I like to say, you get out into the middle of Antarctica and it's a white landscape. Often there's no mountains in sight. The exterior topography flattens out quite a bit, but the social topography becomes incredibly mountainous and alpine. And
Hmm.
you're really sort of finding out uh, your best friends or people that just seem to bug you a lot. And what's more, it's 24/7. It's closer than most families. I suppose there are situations where families are cooped up in a house all winter together or something like that. It's closer than most families. It's every single meal. It's your job all day long. It's you relying on each other for certain chores or whatever the shared workload is to, to do something, to get something done because you've pared the team down. You have to just have about the right number of people. Maybe there's a couple of backups or, it's two people working on the same part of it, but basically you're relying on everybody. So it becomes tricky and it requires a lot of communication. Part of this Thwaites project, we really worked on that because there were too many cases where teams came back with big personal issues that slowed down. I mean, our objective was writing papers, writing scientific results about
Mm.
what had happened. And if that got slowed down by the interpersonal events that had happened during the trip, that was a bad thing. So we spent a lot of time working on communication and agreements and um, getting to know each other beforehand as much as possible so that things went as well as possible in the field. Even with that work, it is a challenge. But like I said, you wind up most of the time becoming lifelong friends with the folks that have gone through this experience, this challenge together. I guess I have to say that one of the additional stresses that has risen quite a bit in the last few decades has been this is you spend a lot of time waiting for the machinery of the logistical system to actually put you in the field. So, because of aging equipment, because of limited budgets, the National Science Foundation struggles mightily to get everything done that they've scheduled for a year. And so you spend a lot of time waiting in McMurdo and also dealing and negotiating with, well, how much time are we going to get? Can everybody in my team who's committed to this and showed up in McMurdo, can they all get out to the field and do the thing that they've been working on for years? And in many cases, you have to cut back quite a bit. And that puts a stress on the leadership quite a bit because you were committed to try to get everybody out there. You had a plan, you had a science objective, and a lot of stress on the team because really unfortunate decisions have to be made in terms of they're not going to send the big plane out there with all of us. They're going to send a much smaller plane, and five of us will try to do in 1 week what we were hoping to do in 3 weeks out
Yeah.
of the site, that sort of thing. So that has been an added stressor for teams. And it's just part of the game anymore. So you have to be prepared, and I think this relates to business. You have to be prepared for prioritizing on the fly, and trying to identify what's going to give you the best result with limited resources, and in some cases, a surprise in terms of the limit of those resources. Um, yeah, and that it presents a challenge. It is surprising how, if you prioritize well, uh, we've had situations where we got 3 days on site, and yet because we knew exactly how to get the most data um, in those 3 days and had practiced while we were waiting, in the main base in McMurdo. Yeah, we got quite a bit out of it, and that feels good to do, but it doesn't feel good going through it because it's such a collapse of what you had carefully planned. The quote by Eisenhower works so well for Antarctica that planning plans are almost useless, but planning is essential. You have to plan over and over again
Yeah.
so that you really understand the parts, the components, the priorities, and also how one thing, supports another. So if part A doesn't happen, then part B is useless, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
That sort of detailed nuts and bolts of what you're going to do, how you're going to answer a question or meet an objective. Yeah, essential, and you've got to be ready to redo it over and over and over again, and sometimes with very little time to make a new decision.
And where does the money come from?
Well, the money also comes from NSF, although sometimes also from NASA, which makes it a little interesting because you've got your science in general. In the U.S., the National Science Foundation operates the logistics in Antarctica. They are the ones that provide you with access to Antarctica, the field work. NASA usually is interested in remote sensing, and you've written in a part that says we'll go evaluate what we see in satellite data over in this area of Antarctica, and it's up to NSF to get us there. So now you've got a science boss in NASA, and then you've got a logistical resource in NSF, and you're trying to make both of them happy or work with both of them. That can be a bit of a challenge.
Excellent. I mean, it's got a couple of minutes till commercial break, but I'm interested. You talk, it's about remote sensing. How would you define remote sensing so people are
Uh,
really clear
um,
about what it is?
Yeah, measurement at a distance, basically. And it works really, really well for the polar regions because, typical geology or typical oceanography, I guess, you're on a ship or you're walking across the landscape, you're measuring things basically in contact with them, but you can only survey a limited area. Now, for most of the landscape, on Earth, people have been to most of those mountains and hills and valleys and streams. That's not the case for the polar region. So, as satellite data really became available and capable, starting, I would say, in the late 1980s, early 1990s, the science of glaciology, of the science across the polar regions, just surged because finally we could really map the continent the way in a way that showed how the ice moved, in a way that showed how flow worked, where buried lakes were underneath the ice, where the bedrock was having a big influence on the shape of the ice. Um, in terms of the ocean, we were able to map the surface temperature in great detail. That's actually precedes the 1980s a little bit. Um, and incredibly accurate elevation map so we could see where the ice sheet is changing rapidly in great detail. All of that just surged through the 1990s, the early 2000s. And then we got to a point where that data really pointed out big areas that were changing rapidly. One of them, Thwaites Glacier, we really thought we had done about all we could do with remote sensing to identify the area as changing rapidly and presenting a big threat. It was at a scale, this glacier, that really had an impact on the world's oceans. So we proposed to go there with a large team, and I guess we can talk about that after the break.
We can. So it's a great way to end that section. I found the conversation so far absolutely fascinating. I'm thoroughly enjoying this. What an set of experience you have, and the work that you do is absolutely fascinating. And just before we go, I mentioned before, right at the beginning of this section, I had an event earlier in the week, and I mentioned there's some pretty interesting types of people who were there. But only reason I said that, only reason I shared it is that there were a lot of people and I noticed that through this show, there were a lot of people who are doing really good work out there, and we don't hear about it. We hear the news about so much negativity, but I meet so many people and through this show out there doing really noble, helpful, contributory work that's designed to, in some way, to help us through the challenges that we're going through as a planet right now. So I just want to let you know there are people out there doing good things. If you listen to the media and you're feeling a bit low right now about everything that you're hearing, you just don't get to hear about a lot of the things that are going on. So we're going to go to commercial break now, and after the break, we'll find out a little bit more about Thwaites and why it's so important. And maybe is there something that businesses that could help with this issue. So we'll be back again with you in just a couple of minutes. Do join us after the break. Hi, this is Chris Cooper, and I'm back with Dr. Ted Scambos, and we've been talking about the fascinating world of remote sensing and visits to Antarctica, and some of the lessons and learnings of working with people out there on the ice. And Ted, you've said that the Earth is staggering forward faster than it ever has before. There's a real pace of warming that's going on, which is beyond nature. What is your perspective on where we're at right now?
Or uh, we've set up an atmosphere that is dragging the Earth forward towards a warmer planet far faster than this kind of change has happened ever before. Now, there are tipping points, and those tipping points, some of them have been crossed before. So you do see abrupt reactions in the climate record or in the polar ice record in the past. But right now, we're taking one of the main controls of how warm the Earth gets, the atmosphere, and we have slammed it into a place that the Earth hasn't seen in millions of years. And that world, millions of years ago, had very little ice on it, had much higher sea level. I mean, staggering levels of sea level compared to what we see now. And because we're driving the system so hard, it's revealing processes that we haven't seen before, like this very rapid retreat in the Antarctic Peninsula, not a huge glacier in terms of sea level rise, but the process that it illustrated is pretty scary. This glacier lost miles and miles of 1,000-foot thick ice in just a couple of months. And so extrapolating that to a larger glacier has a real serious impact for the pace of sea level rise. Um, yeah, in the past, the ultimate driver of climate on Earth were things like mountain building, which tends to absorb CO2 out of the atmosphere and over a million years cool off the planet, or these oscillations. The scientific word is Milankovitch cycles, but basically it has to do with the tilt of the Earth's axis and the shape of the Earth's orbit around the sun. Those things very gradually push on one hemisphere or the other and can tip it, at least in the situation that we've been in for the last few million years, tip it back and forth between ice ages and warm periods in between. But those things happen, first of all, they typically happen to one hemisphere primarily, and the driving hemisphere appears to be the northern hemisphere. And so when that slips into an ice age, because of the impact the ice age has on the biosphere, you change the air, you change the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and eventually that drags the other hemisphere into an ice age. So we know that greenhouse gases have a very strong effect on the Earth's climate. But now, because of the discovery of fossil fuels and this incredible industrial revolution that we've been in for close to 2 centuries, uh, we are pushing the atmosphere hard, I mean, really hard in the direction of a warmer planet. We have only begun to see the kinds of changes that would actually be in equilibrium with the level of CO2 and methane that we have in the atmosphere right now. So it's as though the Earth is being dragged forward like some kind of tug of war, where the inertia, the pull back the other way, is the thermal inertia of the ocean, and to a certain extent, the landscape, the hydrological system, all of that sort of stuff. But there's a limit to how hard it can pull, and it keeps getting pulled across these thresholds one by one, like the loss of Arctic sea ice or changes in ocean circulation or the retreat of glaciers in Antarctica. And all those things are going to unfold lightning quick by geologic standards, but incredibly slowly by human political standards. And that is the challenge. That is the challenge, is that we're smart enough to know how our Earth works well enough to be able to forecast 100 years from now, 200 years from now, we are going to see some massive changes in the planet that we all live on. And yet it just doesn't seem ever to rise to the level of top priority to address it. It's a big ongoing discussion, and waiting until tomorrow or next week or next year or even next decade is plausible, but it just keeps getting worse and worse. So we really need to address this. And as I said, we're smart enough scientifically as humans to know what's coming. Are we smart enough politically to take action before it's a catastrophe? And oh my God, why weren't we
Yeah.
told? Come on. So, uh, it's uh, it's a real challenge to stay upbeat. I will say that we've definitely identified, and in part, the threat of climate change has caused us to devise the kinds of systems that we need to address the problem, like wind power and solar power and smarter electric grids, and move away from fossil fuels, move to cleaner fossil fuels. All of those things are good things to do. I just hope that they unfold rapidly enough. They are becoming economically plausible, and that is the best news of all, is that it is now not just plausible, but in many cases better to use solar, wind, and battery in combination to spin up a new power grid than it was to build, say, a coal plant or a fossil fuel natural gas plant.
Yeah. And you have particular expertise around Thwaites. This particular glacier. Tell us a little bit about Thwaites and why it's so significant potentially.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
we found, as I was saying before the break, using remote sensing, an area in Antarctica that is truly large in scale, as you said, about the size of the United Kingdom. Maybe another example would be the state of Florida. Although Florida is not shaped like Thwaites Glacier, the island of Britain, not exactly either. The state of Georgia, the U.S. state of Georgia, is shaped more like Thwaites Glacier. Very wide mouth of the glacier that faces the ocean and a huge sprawling reach into the interior of West Antarctica. Let me give everybody a little idea. If you can recognize that that is a representation of Antarctica, with this being the Antarctic Peninsula, as South America is over here, this area right in here is known as West Antarctica. It's the part of Antarctica that's in the Western Hemisphere. And it has a large glacier smack in the middle of that coastline there that's been retreating since at least the 1990s and probably since the 1970s because of warm ocean water reaching the coast of the continent. Why is the warm water reaching the coast of the continent? Because changing greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and warming of the planet have changed winds around Antarctica, and they are changing the ocean currents and allowing this warmer water to reach the coast when it didn't do that before. So, warm water at depth. Wait a second. So, so we identified the area, and both the US and the UK groups of scientists recognize this as being the primary threat for sea level rise from either ice sheet. Greenland is evolving rapidly, but in a relatively steady and easier to forecast means. Antarctica has several large glaciers, Thwaites foremost among them, that could suddenly retreat. It's just because of the geometry, the landscape below that ice that allows it to unload ice more rapidly. So a major project was proposed. Both the US and the UK scientists said this is the place to look. Both of their science support organizations, NERC in the UK and NSF in the US, teamed up to fund this massive project and try to place six different teams, well, six different projects, multiple teams out in the middle of West Antarctica and collect data in situ to try to support what we've seen in remote sensing and understand how this glacier was going to react primarily within this century. That was the line that we had that said, we need to do this urgently because there's a good chance that this could really pick up the pace of sea level rise before the end of this century. That still remains a strong possibility some of what we found indicates that it's a little less likely that it could run away that soon, but everything that we found suggests that we're not out of the woods and that within 100 to 200 years, we will see at least 2 feet of sea level rise. And as you alluded to at the very beginning, very likely more because the rest of West Antarctica will be drawn into this deflating area. Like I said, the size of the state of Georgia, actually a little bit larger than that. Um, and it will pull in areas resulting eventually in a sea level rise of 2 to 3 meters
Right.
rather than just 2 feet.
And what's the impact of a 2 to 3 meter sea level rise?
I don't know if I need to elaborate. London is only a few London is only a few meters above sea level.
Yeah.
Shanghai the same way. Um, Florida, San Francisco Bay, San Francisco itself not a threat particularly, but San Jose and the areas to the south of the bay, very low elevation. Louisiana, Houston, all over the world. It's a big deal. I mean, it's not just the people that live there, it's the economy that's there located around the coast. And this is going to take massive amounts of money to address if we do it locally at each, city where a threat presents itself. I mean, a much more cost-effective means of dealing with this future trend, not just from Antarctica, but from the ice sheets as a whole, is to address greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And, we know how to do that, but I guess you can't blame people for making money and having a successful business, but we need to get those businesses to take their immense financial resources and point them towards clean energy and addressing the problem. Or rather, I mean, I guess I'm going to talk to your business world guys now, but I mean, venture capitalism likes to say, transformative or disruptive, that word is often used, technology, where we break through and we completely overwhelm a previous technology. I think you're going to have a big fight on your hands if you present it that way to the existing infrastructure for fossil fuel burning. And so a better way would be to try to get them to go directly at clean energy and clean sources of energy and more efficient use of that energy. Do you want to talk more about Thwaites, or do you want to talk more about
Well,
the potential impacts of climate change?
well, I think the thing to think about is probably what are the solutions. And is there anything you mentioned there about, corporations and business contributing to helping to alleviate this? How do you get the attention of people and to feel the urge to put the money into something which could be, 2 or 3 generations down the line before they really start to see the impact when obviously your political terms tend to be a few years. How do we get into the attention of people to take this really, really seriously?
I was impressed with a documentary that was shown, I think, by the BBC in the UK on plastics and
Yeah.
plastics in the ocean. And it had a huge impact on public perception of plastics and plastic waste. It moved the needle in a big way. And people are aware of this now. They're aware of this microplastics, the buildup of drifting plastic in the ocean, all of those things. I think that's the best path in the near term to getting the attention and the political will to continue to move in the direction of cleaner energy and yeah, towards caring more about the future of the planet in a way that is planet wide. Um, uh, yeah, in the short term, I guess I'm going to make an appeal. I'm close to retirement. I'm not asking for money for myself. I'm asking your businesses to consider strongly supporting the scientific community in this research all over the ecological system, climate system, north and south. All these areas are changing dramatically. I just want to say, I mean, Thwaites, big, big deal. Antarctic Peninsula, big, big deal. Nobody who lives in the polar regions doubts the impact, the huge impact that global warming has already had. the fact that the US can turn away from paying attention to climate change right now, there's nobody who lives on the North Slope of Alaska that doesn't know that the planet is changing. There's a severe impact on their livelihoods every day because it's way warmer than it was a few decades ago. Um, so I think contributing to research, because research is basically paused in the US for the next few years, and I'm not sure how well it will come back. Funding may come back, but priorities may be quite different from what they were just a year or two ago. So I'd encourage that. But more in the longer term, I think, yeah, taking a look at how you can take advantage of a world that moves in the direction of carbon neutral and technological advances that lead to direct carbon dioxide extraction, paths to reducing methane emissions, all of those things in the long run are likely to be profitable. There'll be a strong interest in those. And many countries right now, they're about to hold a meeting in Brazil on the COP30 meeting that will talk about paths forward and the current science on global climate change. I think those things are all, good, reliable things to consider if I were a businessman and involved in an industry that had anything to do with engineering solutions. Now, a slippery slope is the idea that we could engineer things specifically to address rapid changes in the environment. For example, at Thwaites Glacier, the idea of putting a giant curtain in the ocean to prevent this warm water. I didn't get into a lot of detail about that, but that is the ultimate cause of the retreat of Thwaites is warm ocean. Well, you wouldn't want to swim in it, but it is a degree or two above freezing, and that's warm for polar ocean standards because it has that degree or two of heat in it above the freezing point. It erodes the ice very quickly when it touches the base of the Thwaites Glacier. Okay, let's make that stop. We'll put 100-mile curtain of plastic in the ocean, and that will redirect this water, and it won't influence Thwaites. Earth saved, case closed, we're done. Such a project would cost hundreds of billions of dollars. It would need to be maintained because it's a very rugged environment. Even the ocean there is, traversed by icebergs and covered by sea ice. Installing it would require a fleet of ships that we don't have right now. There is a lot of interest in pursuing solutions like that. That's not the only one. One of the most widely discussed ones is putting aerosols in the atmosphere to screen out part of the sunlight. All of these things, most of the scientific community, it's not quite as unanimous as the consensus on the existence of climate change itself, which is in the upper 90s of climate scientists percentages. But most scientists think these are very bad ideas. First of all, they address the symptoms, not the solution. They're incredibly expensive. Why not spend the money directly on the cause of greenhouse warming? And there's unintended consequences throughout all of these ideas that might appear to ameliorate the effects of climate change. So I want to say that if you as a business think, you're interested or you'll get billions of dollars, and it would be billions, from nations to build a curtain, install aerosols, change the ocean somehow. The scientific community in general won't be with you on that. We would say it's a bad idea and fraught with consequences. And what sort of massive litigation would ensue if something went wrong? It's a strange thing to contemplate.
Yes.
So yeah, why not take the smart way out and go after the cause of the problem in the first place, especially since you're going to spend billions of dollars on these, what are arguably temporary solutions. They're going to be pushed by industries that have a vested interest in continuing to produce greenhouse gas causing fossil fuels. Yeah, let's go straight for the answer instead.
Excellent. Well, we're going to go have to end it there because we've only got a minute left till the end of the show. So, do you have a final message you'd like to leave
So,
us with?
all right. Uh, Uh, gosh, yeah, I think we live in an interesting world. We're at a decision point, certainly here in the United States, on what the past should be in the future. I look with admiration at the steadiness, albeit slow, of progress in Western Europe, and even China and India take it seriously about getting eventually to an energy solution that reflects the needs of climate change. And yeah, I'm optimistic that we have everything we need to get there and the intelligence to know how it's going to play out. I just hope we actually do it.
Yeah. Well, on that note, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I found the whole conversation fascinating and having the opportunity to meet you and hear about your experiences on the ice and your perceptions and thoughts. And you've Thwaites was something I'd heard of it, but I didn't fully understand the significance of it and what we're doing right now. So, I think one of the things I hope to do with this show is just introduce you to people who are doing different things, who are are contributing to topics and areas that are really important to our future. You've certainly been one of those today, Ted, and to inspire people to actually focus in on careers and setting up businesses and focusing on areas that actually do good and become part of the solution and not add to the problems that are in right now. So I will leave you there for this week. Next week we have a gentleman called Michael Glauser on the show. We're going to be talking to him next week. Another fascinating individual with an amazing story that will hopefully inspire you and lift you to think about doing things a little bit differently. So once again, a big thank you to Ted. To check out, find out a little bit more about the work that Ted does and the University of Colorado and the Earth Science and Observation Center, which is a part of the university. Go to CIRES, which is CIRES colorado.edu. You can also check out that same link, cires.colorado.edu, and go to /people/Theodore Scambos, and you'll be able to see there more information about Ted, Theodore, and his work. So once again, Ted, been an absolute pleasure getting to know you. Thanks again, Lilani, and I hope this has inspired you and got you to think a little bit differently. And maybe if you're a business owner, think about actually how can we contribute to being part of the solution. So take care, everybody.
Thank you very much.